Welcome to the sixth edition of 2025's FO Exclusive. Last month, we covered the drama about the US budget and the US-China tariff deal, both of which were unleashing new economic uncertainty. Obviously, that persists. And we also talked about hunger stalking Gaza and a big crisis brewing in Israel. Well, we know there's a big crisis now in Israel, Iran, and includes the US. We'll talk about that later. This month was an eventful month. What happened? Well, a lot happened. The US budget is still stuck in the Senate. There's a debt crisis brewing. Ukraine launched a spectacular attack on airfields deep inside Russia, reminiscent of the SAS in World War II, the Special Air Service of the UK. The Ukrainians smuggled as many as 117 drones as far away as eastern Siberia, reportedly damaging 41 Russian planes, including strategic bombers. And of course, the Russians have responded by bombing the Ukrainians. So the conflict goes on. Now, in Poland, something very interesting happened. And Carle, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I'm not the world's expert on Polish last names. The hard right candidate of the Law and Justice Party. Some people call it right. Some people call this party far right. Some people call it hard right. Whatever, it's to the right. Won Poland's presidential election in the runoff. He got 50.9% of the vote. So it is not just the US that is divided. He beat Rafał Trzaskowski, the government-backed centrist. Now, Poland has an elected president, but it has a parliamentary form of government. I know it gets confusing. The Europeans have confusing systems. After all, these are young democracies. Poland was under communist rule till 1989. The Berlin Wall only fell in 1989. Actually, Poland was under communist rule till 1991. So it's a very, very young democracy. And the prime minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, is a centrist. He does not exactly love the Law and Justice Party. So now you have the prime minister and president at loggerheads. Good luck with that. We'll see how the cookie crumbles or how Poland functions. As if that wasn't bad enough, there's lots of trouble in Europe. The UK has had to cut spending and reverse its pledges. Europeans have proved that they are feckless again. NATO members have caved into Donald Trump's demands and promised to increase their defense spending to 5% of the GDP by 2035.
They took a belated, courageous step.
Glenn, I don't know where the money is coming from. All these countries have high debt. So
they all control their own printing presses.
Well, yes, so they'll probably have to cut welfare spending, less spending for those pesky immigrants, more taxes, especially for the middle classes, something lovely to look forward to. We shall see where it all ends up. But, you know, we will see where Europe ends. Europe is not that bad in a state as, say, Colombia, where Miguel Uribe Turbay, a conservative senator and presidential candidate, was shot in the head. Now, he's a tough chap. He's still alive, though. As if that wasn't tragic enough, a plane took off, a Boeing plane. We have a lot to thank Boeing, Glenn. And the Boeing plane took off in India from Ahmedabad, an airport into which Glenn and I have flown into, I think, more than once. And it didn't quite take off. It took off, but couldn't take off. And it sort of slowly wafted down, killing everybody on board. And there were hundreds on board, and people died in the buildings that the plane hit. Preliminary inquiries suggest it was an electrical failure. So thank you, Boeing, once again for making a great plane and solving the
Oh, you always
overpopulation.
should look at the people who maintain the planes are invariably at fault.
Oh, yes, the Indians, the overpopulated Indians, I suppose. But anyway, whoever may be at fault, it was a tragic incident, and it certainly damages Boeing, and of course raises questions about the safety of air travel in India. The Director General of Civil Aviation, just to show that I am not just targeting the Americans, the Director General of Civil Aviation in India is a chap called Kidwai. Till yesterday, he was in charge of farmer welfare because he's a member of the Indian Administrative Service, the heaven-born service in India that runs everything from the Archaeological Survey of India, because of course no archaeologist can, of course, administer such far-flung monuments. And they also run the Reserve Bank of India, and not an economist, because economists don't know anything anyway. So the IAS, descendants of the Indian civil service, bastard children of the empire, run everything and anything in India, and maybe the DGCA needs to look at it, assuming, of course, he knows anything about aviation and anything about aeronautical engineering, which I highly doubt. Nevertheless, moving swiftly on from violent Colombia and inefficient India, it's not all doom and gloom. Vietnam has said it will scrap the death penalty for 8 crimes, including embezzlement. Seems to be a step in the right direction. They are discovering
government officials trying to protect themselves.
Oh, yes, indeed. Indeed. That may be the case. And they're pretending to be humane. And Elon Musk and Donald Trump have had a spectacular falling out, making for great public entertainment. Glenn and I have enjoyed it very much. Trump has approved Nippon Steel takeover of US Steel. And so 3 cheers to Japanese diplomats. Our friends are patient and discreet, diligent and dutiful. So well done, Japanese. You've managed to achieve something that you couldn't even during the Joe Biden era. And now we'll move on to the 2 things we'll address this week. Not 3, 2. And the reason is both of them are weighty, both of them are consequential. One of them is, of course, the clash between Iran and Israel, or rather the US-Israel-Iran clash, because now it is a ménage à trois. It is not just 2 in the bed, it's a threesome. It's a proper threesome. And the second issue we'll talk about is the catastrophic decline of norms, political and cultural, in the US. So over to you, Glenn. Let's talk about the Middle East, because you are the CIA guy. You belong to the Central Intelligence Agency that in 1953 was manipulated by MI6 to conduct a coup in the interests of Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, not even an American company. And therefore, original sin is your forte.
Well, we've created opportunity for 75 years in the Middle East now as a result. When we look at, of course, the events of the past several weeks in particular, which is what we'll talk about, have alarmed everybody and drawn the attention. But I don't intend to be facetious or dismissive here when I say, however, that it is the shiny object that draws the attention of the eye, and that I think the U.S. actions, the attack, the attack, may have less consequence than most all of us assume to be the case. There have been profound strategic structural changes to the power dynamics in the Middle East since October 7, 2023. But and they are related, of course, to the U.S. attack. But the attack itself, I think, will add up to have fewer consequences than we initially thought. So what do I mean? Let's look first. Who are the players in this? There are three, really: the U.S., Israel, and Iran. And this being the American attack in the last several weeks. So, what are Israel's assessment of the nature of the Iranian regime and the threat that Iran may pose, or they believe it poses? And what are Iran's objectives? Now, there's no single voice because there are a diversity of views in Israel, most societies, most governments, certainly in the case of Israel. But the dominant faction, as we know, is the right wing of the political spectrum. I can never recall the names of the parties at present beyond Likud, but Bibi Netanyahu depends on them for his political existence and maintenance
Glenn,
and power.
the two arch villains are Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, both of whom have talked about genocide, both of whom are hardline, and Bibi is in bed with them to persist his rule or to prolong his rule.
Right.
He fears being tried for corruption, and so he's gone into bed with these guys. There was a time when he was more centrist and he had a government with Ehud Barak, but now it is all nutters in charge.
Well, I'll let you say they're nutters, but their objectives, not exclusively and not with certainty or total purity of no division of thought, are to colonize, to seize, to make once again Israel, all of the West Bank and Gaza itself, which means the expulsion of the Palestinians who are not there by right because 2,000 years ago the Jews were, and to destroy the Iranian regime as the only solution. Those are not necessarily crazy objectives, but they are, in today's context, certainly extreme. So the assessment is that Iran...
that is not necessarily the objective of all of Israel.
Correct. Oh, absolutely.
There are many Israeli politicians who oppose this. In particular, the intelligence and the special forces people tend to be secular, and they certainly oppose Bibi Netanyahu himself, maybe not openly. The head of Shin Bet has left, or probably is leaving. I think he's probably left, and that caused a lot of controversy. So there are wheels within wheels, and it would be unfair to tar entirety of Israel polity.
Absolutely, they are the faction that they're the faction that controls the government, or Netanyahu, and shapes to which Netanyahu must respond in policy. He can't stray too far from a position that would lead them to leave the coalition and then subject him to prosecution. I think clearly throughout most of Israeli history up to the present, a strong majority, or certainly a majority, absolute majority of the population has embraced policies that oppose that were in favor of a two-state solution and negotiated solution with Iran, but they don't control the power right now. So the assessment is that Iran is an existential threat. Iran is developing a nuclear weapon, and that is absolutely unacceptable because that is places Israel's and all Jews' survival more than at risk, but on the brink of extermination. That U.S. and that regime change in Iran is fundamental. It's necessary to change the strategic equation, and that to do that, there must be U.S. involvement because really that's beyond the capabilities of Israel alone. And then the other factor that we've touched upon is that hostility to Iran, war with Iran, continuing war in Gaza are necessary to Bibi Netanyahu's political survival and maintaining power as prime minister. That's the perspective of the Iranians. The U.S.'s assessment differs some. And they were Tulsi Gabbard, who was not someone I have praised, I think, ever, did a competent job during her testimony to the U.S. Congress in presenting the U.S. intelligence community's assessment. She read verbatim the assessment, which was that Iran is not does not possess a nuclear weapon, and that Ayatollah Khamenei, the spiritual leader of the regime, or the government, has not reauthorized that the Iranian nuclear program manufacture a weapon, but that the Iranian nuclear program has been secretly developing weapons-grade fissile material for which there is only one use, and that is to make a nuclear weapon, and that Iran was anything from days, which is what the Israelis assert, to a good number of months away from being able to manufacture one. So Trump was faced with a decision. He had to what does he think is happening before he decides what to do? And he has put himself in a box by saying that the U.S. will no longer engage in forever wars, which would preclude an invasion, and at the same time that he will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. Then he aligned himself with the right-wing Israeli assessment, which is that, and this is why he criticized and was characterized as having disagreed with Tulsi Gabbard. He said she is wrong. That's a classical Trump statement, actually. It was just crude, but what he was actually saying was that it is irrelevant to him that they don't have a weapon, that the Iranian capability to manufacture one was an existential threat. He aligned himself once again with the far right of the Israeli political spectrum, and just as he has with Vladimir Putin and Russian issues. And so therefore, the choice was, okay, how do we stop what is unacceptable? And he was on the horns of the dilemma because all of his advisors said what Americans should have learned through painful experience, that destroying a regime is relatively easy, but in a nation of 90 million people of a vastly different culture, without any visible alternative, be it a party or a number of individuals or a power center to the current regime, that to say, as I did in a number of interviews, that the consequences would be fraught, his decision was fraught with consequences, is an understatement. And he, realizing that, he thought, how do I find a way out of this? And he chose what I expected would actually be the case, to do a minimalist attack on nuclear capabilities and to declare victory. And of course, the other side gets to say Iran as the attacked party can decide to act as it wishes. But that's what Trump actually did, which was a frankly coherent response for an impossible dilemma of his own making. Now, the Iranians consistently have shown for years, and in particular since 7 October 2023, that their top priority is national regime survival. They are not crazies at all. They're very subtle and astute. And they have signaled repeatedly that they wanted some way out short of open war. And that's what they did in this instance by informing the Qatari government, therefore the United States, in advance of their response, where and when they would respond, and then making it a one-off, sending missiles to America's largest base, which is symbolically striking the heart of the U.S. presence in the Middle East, and then stopping, which Trump has seized upon. So in the scheme of the catastrophic situation that obtains, this was pretty much a minimalist sequence of events. Because the alternative would be a regime change, which is impossible to predict, or simply accepting that Trump had put himself in a box and couldn't do anything that made any sense. Yeah, Atul, sorry.
So, a little bit of context, because both of us think about history. In fact, that's all we think about. We are fuddy duddies um, from the past. So, very quickly, let's run through what the Israelis did. The Israelis decapitated the top Iranian leadership. It was spectacular special ops. Mossad and whoever acted, all these special ops forces who acted in favor of
It's certainly one of the great intelligence operations in
of all
history.
time, of all time.
Tactically brilliant, flawless, and a great success. But tactics are not strategy.
Exactly. But let's get to what they did. So they decapitate, and they've told me in private, some of them, that we can kill anyone, anywhere, anytime. Importantly, they did it at a time when US and Iran were having negotiations. And so our colleague Peter Isaacson says, look, this is extremely duplicitous, because now diplomacy, which already had a bad name, is further discredited. Maybe. Diplomacy has always been duplicitous, but this was taking it a little too far. So the Israeli jubilation over the success of taking out the top military leadership, and B, then hitting the nuclear and missile sites. They hit a number of military installations, and they hit them pretty well. And apparently, they were able to control Iranian airspace. That's what they claim. Of course, the Iranians counter that. Doesn't matter. What is also true is that the Iranians managed to hit Israel as well. It wasn't exactly painless for Israel. They've hit the business district, they've hit apartment buildings, and the Israeli economy is under immense strain. So Israel is paying a heavy price.
However, that's one of the areas where the Israelis' assessment wisely was more pessimistic than the reality. In the range of possibilities, it's wise to skew towards the more dangerous options. And they had been anticipating from hundreds to thousands of casualties. And there have been, I think, 25, or I forget what it is, with 400 injured. Whatever the number is, an order of magnitude less than they had anticipated. And
yes.
The Iranian counterstrike capabilities have been shown to be less powerful than the Israelis had feared.
Yeah, but the economic dislocation is immense, and there's also an argument that they may be holding some of their powder dry. So we don't know yet. And the Israelis do believe that the Iranian regime, is a paper tiger. They believe it's utterly corrupt. They believe they've infiltrated the Iranian regime at all levels. Remember, they killed the Palestinian leader of Hamas in a VIP guest house. That is the equivalent of killing someone in Blair House in Washington, D.C., which is next to the White House. So the Israelis...
That's the mansion where all heads of state visiting the United States will stay.
Yeah. So clearly they've demonstrated that the regime may puff itself up and breathe fire, but the regime simply is not as cohesive, is not as effective, and simply not as united as it was in the aftermath of the 1979 revolution. The Israelis also believe it's now or never. I mean, for Bibi Netanyahu, it is, if not now, when? If not us, who? Because he sees himself as the savior of Israel, the guarantor of Israeli security, and he has a messianic view of himself. Remember, his brother died in Entebbe, Yoni Netanyahu. He was Seret Matkal, the elite commando unit in which Bibi served as well, and Bibi has never forgiven nor forgotten his brother's death. So he believes Iran is an existential threat, and with Hamas weakened, Hezbollah's top leadership dead, and the Assad regime gone, this is a great opportunity to hit Iran, because the danger from proxies is minimal. The ultimate goal for the Israelis is regime change. Their dream scenario would be a regime that is liberal and tolerant and friendly with Israel. After all, the baby Shah, his daughter has married a Jewish lad. If he was to go back and there could be the pre-1979 bonhomie between Israel and Iran, that would be lovely. But uh, there are wrinkles. Regime change is expensive, takes time, and even though the Americans would agree that ultimately Iran can only have peace if this vicious regime of mullahs goes, because this 1979 revolution brought in a Shia ideology based on fanaticism, based on martyrdom, based on opposition to evil Uncle Sam. And of course, evil Uncle Sam had started this whole game in a way inadvertently by taking out Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, entirely unnecessary. Iran could have evolved in a very different direction. But 1979 led to this crazy Islamic regime. And of course, some believe that perhaps the best thing should be to take out Ayatollah Khamenei. But going back to the Israelis, they believe that regime change and a weakening of Iran, if they could do to Iran what they've done to Syria, meaning the Azeris could have a little bit of territory, the Kurds could be a little more autonomous, and the various minorities, the various ethnicities, and the Sunni minority, which is persecuted. Because remember, the Fars majority speaking Farsi is 60%. Iran's birth rate is not what it was in 1979. It's actually below 2. It's below replacement level. So Iran is not the country it was. And there is a belief amongst the Israelis that they can put pressure and squeeze Iran. Now, the British, who have longer memory, and of course they installed the earlier client regime, the Qajars, who were basically British pawns, and so were, in some way or another, the later rulers. And when Reza Shah didn't play ball, the British conveniently dispatched him and installed his feckless son. So the British, who were the great arch-villains of 1953, today act the wise men and women, and they say not so fast. They are skeptical. They point out that, yes, Israel has the Begin doctrine. Now, for those of you who don't know the Begin doctrine, in 1981, Menachem Begin destroyed an Iraqi nuclear reactor through an air attack. And remember, back during the fight for Israel, there was Haganah, which was secular and centrist, and there was the more right-wing Irgun and Stern Gang, and Begin came from the more right-wing Irgun, if I remember correctly. Or maybe
let's not give too much. Let's not give too much stage time to powers that had power 3 generations ago.
Okay, fine. So the Begin doctrine, that is not Britain, of course. The Begin doctrine is none of Israel's enemies or potential enemies should be able to have nuclear weapons. The Begin doctrine still underpins Israeli national security. And Ehud Olmert, following this doctrine, destroyed Syrian nuclear facilities in 2007. And Netanyahu tried to follow the Begin doctrine against Iran twice between 2009 and 2013. So all of this has happened before. And now, of course, was the opportunity, and they've hit. But both the British and the Iranians and the Iranians point out that, look, Iran has imperial memory, and Iran may be corrupt, but it's more cohesive than its enemies imagine. Also, as someone pointed out, what happens when you kill military officers at the top? Well, you achieve paralysis in the short term, great tactical advantage. But who replaces them? It's a younger lot, younger men, who may be more competent and will certainly have more testosterone. And all of them know that they have a bullet with their name written on it. So they might be proper nutters, to quote a friend. And so killing off the top layer may be great in the short run, may enable you to strike many targets, but it may not necessarily lead to regime change. There's also another issue that Iran in the past has showed that it has been able to survive chaos. In 1980, Saddam Hussein attacked Iran. It was in post-revolutionary disarray. And despite 8 years of war and despite Western support, including CIA support, Saddam Hussein couldn't dislodge this theocratic, not theological, theocratic regime. So Iran may be more cohesive than the Israelis imagine, and there may be what some people call, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, I'm not a native Farsi speaker, even though Farsi was the official language of India till 1858, Zira Parcham, rally to the flag. So there might be a little bit of rallying to the flag because of Israeli attacks. Nationalism may take over, as it does in any country under attack. Look at Pakistan. In the conflict, the unpopular military suddenly became popular. And regime change may be far more difficult than people imagine it to be. And our estimation is it probably may be a bridge too far. However,
and this is why, other than the right wing, as you characterize them, the secular professionals in the intelligence services, the IDF, which is the Israeli military, in the opposition, which is probably majority population representative of, all think that the desire of Netanyahu and the far right to do what you've been talking about is a bridge too far. Puts it nicely, is not possible. If what's the saying? If wishes were wings, then pigs could fly, or some such sort of thing as that. So, I like to talk about the short term. Not so much more about the reasonings, but the short-term and medium-term consequences, and then fundamentally the strategic consistencies, which is why I said this American action may prove to be a flash in the mountains as opposed to the pan. The fundamental issues remain unchanged. Iran retains its potential to manufacture a nuclear weapon, even if all of the scientists involved in the program were assassinated. Pandora's box opened millennia ago, and Adam ate of the apple millennia ago, and you can't kill knowledge. And Iran's a sophisticated society with millions of brilliant people who can study science.
Unlike Ted Cruz, we do know the population of Iran. It is 90 million. We do know that the Fars people are 60% of the population. We do know the various ethnicities. There is the CIA fact book for those of you who want a quick read. Mm-hmm. I'm sure Glenn probably wrote a bit of it. So there you go.
I did. Long superseded from long ago. It's updated every year. Yeah, it's a wonderful product. Anyway, so there's no agreement on limitations or definitions of what Iran can and may not do concerning nuclear research and development. And then something we haven't talked about at all, but which remains in many ways one of the two pillars of shaping the Middle East is the Palestinian issue is not resolved at all, except that 2/3, I think it's 70% of all structures in Gaza have been destroyed, and a quarter of the population is on the imminent brink of literal starvation. So the fundamentals have not changed, and Trump realized, I think, and this is shocking that I'm saying something that seems vaguely complimentary of the fellow, that regime change was not possible, and to do it would make Afghanistan and Iraq look like a birthday party. So the regime may be certainly has been weakened and may be subject to collapse. The regime, meaning Iran.
I mean, eventually, in the long run, just a quick comment. Eventually, in the long run, just as communism collapsed, so will the
Sure.
Iranian regime, because it is
And it will be
based on
stable until the day it's not.
yeah, things last until they don't. And
Yeah.
that is inevitable. But
But the problem is
20% of
there's
Iran,
no.
just one point, 20% of Iran still lives in villages. And the people who live in those villages are still largely in favor of this regime. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah. Well, and all of us are students of Stalin. I think he said revolution, or maybe it was Lenin. I forget. Revolutions are born at the end of a gun rather than through
Barrel of
talk.
the gun. Yeah. Yeah.
And the barrel of a gun. And that's really true. Whoever has the monopoly of power or more power, I mean, the ability to use force, lethal force, calls the shots, not to make an unintended
I'll
pun.
add to your point. I'll add to your point very quickly. Let's assume the regime falls, the mullahs fall. Will it be women protesting in the streets who take over, or will it be Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps? It'll be
Well, in
IRGC,
factions, absolutely.
because they have the
Absolutely.
guns. Unless the women protesting in the streets can convince a section of the military to side with them, and that military turns its guns, that section of the military turns its guns on the IRGC, we are left with the specter of a Pakistan like Iran. The mullahs may go,
Right.
and then you may have a military leadership that takes over, or an Egypt like Iran.
Which is why we have seen, in particular in 1980, 79, 80, and 81, literally hundreds of military officers lying in, where do you put dead people? I forget. In their coffins and filmed by the regime to show what happens to anyone who's even a potential opponent. They killed virtually all of the military leaders, those who didn't flee. So fundamentally, the dynamics, I think, remain the same. However, that's structural, that's long term. Things have fundamentally changed, however, in the Middle East, and that's not because of the U.S. attack, but rather because of Israel's brilliant decimation, more than decimation. Decimation implies 1/10 destruction of Hezbollah and Hamas, not destroyed, but seriously weakened and not cowed, but forcing itself into defense, and of the Iraqi Shia factions supported by Iran too, which means that Syria now has been so far under an erstwhile jihadist moving to become a state not aligned with Russia and Iran. And Hezbollah is not capable at present of acting in any way that's especially dangerous to Israel or to the region. And so you do see a structural change, and those changes can be lasting. They may not. It depends on how things play out in Syria. But the deeper issue of whether Iran has not been addressed. So that's what I think is likely to emerge from this if Trump remains restrained, despite his rhetoric, on the whole.
So very quickly, there'll be broader implications of this conflict. The US is now back in the Middle East. So therefore, attention to Ukraine will be lower and lesser. Ukrainians will be out more and more on their own. China will have more of a freer hand in the Far East. They will squeeze Taiwan. Now, of course, the aircraft carriers are not going anytime soon near Taiwan. Pakistan and Asim Munir met Trump. Field Marshal Asim Munir. General Asim Munir has now become Field Marshal Asim Munir. He is extremely popular, apparently. Not quite, but he's now popular enough. And he met Donald Trump for a closed-door lunch in the White House. And I'm sure, he's promised to be goody two-shoes as far as Iran is concerned, because Iran's eastern border is with Pakistan. And if you go back a few centuries, the Mughals and the Safavids fought a lot for control of Kandahar in Afghanistan. So Sunnis and Shias have fought for that part of the world forever. And he'll have a freer hand against India. So expect fireworks by September, because the Pakistanis will feel less contained and controlled. So the spillover effects are going to be profound, and they are going to be global. And it ain't peace for our times yet. I don't think we can give Donald Trump the peace prize yet, because anything could still happen. The Israelis believe there is unfinished business. The Iranians believe there is unfinished business. So things could flare up. This is a fragile truce. Let's see what happens.
But I don't think things will flare up in the Middle East for at a level that we've seen for several years, because Iran will will lick its wounds, and they won't come close in the immediate short-term future to having being 3 days from building a nuke, and then we'll return to the crisis from before. To me, the one
Their top
structural
priority is to get a
issue
nuke now, because they will look at neighboring Pakistan and they will say, we want the nuclear
sure,
insurance. Because if we have the
sure.
nuclear insurance, then we can be a corrupt government. We can go to the IMF 100 times, not 100, but you know what I mean, 20
Well,
times.
that I do.
And we'll always be
That's an
bailed out.
interest. Yeah, that gets to the interesting difference, generally speaking, between the U.S. assessment and the Israeli. The U.S. assessment has been, and I think it's the correct one, that Iran had its nuclear weapons development program as this inoculation from great power and from the United States invasion and regime change. The Israelis say, well, that may be true or not, but we don't care because that's an existential threat to us. And who in his right mind will accept an existential threat, which could cause instantaneous destruction if we can stop it? And those are legitimate positions on both sides. And I think that's what happened. To me, my last sentence, now we have to turn on to the catastrophes happening in America, is the global significance. I think we're seeing already play out, and you touched upon it, and that's how China will very wisely, astutely, if not wisely, increase its level of pressure on Taiwan's sovereignty through more border incursions into international waters or Taiwanese waters, more numbers of ships and flights and so on, so that the status quo of what is acceptable prior to saying we have to fight to stop this shifts. And that's been ongoing. And I think we've seen this as a direct consequence of America's mucking around with Iran and then stepping back. But let's talk about how America's collapsed.
Very quickly, two things. One is that the nuclear program was begun not by the mullahs, but by the Shah of Iran. That's a very important point to remember. So we can't just tie it with the regime. And then revolution is not a dinner party, and political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Mao Zedong quotes Stephen Schleicher, a former State Department diplomat, has just pointed out.
Of course, you would.
He's in the audience, and Peter Isaacson points out that the moral police have dialed down a little bit in Iran, which is also true. They had to, because the protests were getting too much. And he says they will not lead to a revolution. Well, yeah, not yet, Peter. But the way society is going, you can't keep people in Nizari Shia Islam with its memory of martyrdom and Hashishin assassins going against Sunni persecution and the paranoid persecuted mentality forever. And one final correction before we move on. One person survived the Air India plane. Shiju Verghese points out that is a factual mistake we made. Not everyone died. So one miraculous survivor. So I think now that we have finished with U.S. Iran, U.S. ménage à trois, we can move on to the deterioration of U.S. political norms.
I think the most likely happy solution, or the most likely solution, may ultimately prove to be positive from a Western perspective, is the MBS evolution. That the regime changes, but that is there are successors. One of them is more educated, more internationalist, less millennial in his convictions, and the regime evolves without collapsing.
Brilliant. All right. So deterioration of U.S. political norms. So what has happened? Well, we had a parade on the president's birthday. which was, shall we say, underwhelming. If you have seen parades in other parts of the world, the marching wasn't that great. Glenn, you've got to up your game there.
I'll get to that in a moment.
And we've seen a lot of trouble in Los Angeles. We have, for years, the US was synonymous with rule of law, stable institutions, stability and certainty. That's why a lot of immigrants flocked here. That's why businesses invested here. And the policy environment make US an attractive place to immigrate, a fantastic place to do business. And now, a lot of our feckless European friends representing various countries in the diplomatic corps tell us that Washington, D.C. increasingly resembles capitals of developing countries. They see a style of governing where people matter more than institutions and loyalty matters more than competence. We've seen attacks on universities, which, to be fair, are run by woke totalitarians. But you have, as we were discussing before this event, you have authoritarians on the right and totalitarians on the left these days, and we seem to be living in a curious time. We've gone back to the days of the religious wars in Europe, it seems. But on a serious note, we are talking about serious matters. On a pertinent note, there's a clash now between Harvard and the US government. Now, US soft power rests on Harvard and Hollywood, really. So this is a biggie. Of course, Harvard has an endowment of over 53 billion people. You're a Harvard man. You are now only behind the Catholic and Mormon churches in net worth. Excellent. 27% of Harvard students are foreigners.
Between Bloomberg, who must have given something to Harvard, or I don't know, she's your wealthy person, and we've given 53 billion and $5.
Excellent. And about 27% of Harvard students are foreigners, and many of them coming from the world's wealthiest and most powerful families, whilst others happening to be some of the best and brightest students in the world. Now they are in a protracted legal battle. Apparently, Harvard cannot admit any foreign students. So good luck to all the Indians who dream of Harvard, all the parents, grandparents, aunts, uncle, nieces, and other people from around the world. Also, not just Harvard, we've had a major clash over immigration. ICE officials, immigration and customs enforcement officials, have been told to do all in their power to achieve the very important goal of delivering the single largest mass deportation program in history. These are words of the great president, your great leader, President Donald Trump. The court hearings and legal procedures typically required by law now appear to be quite regularly ignored. There are lots of protests, and in the protests, people have been waving flags of Mexico, which hasn't obviously gone down well with many Americans. The National Guard is out. I don't think Governor Gavin Newsom was consulted. I think both California Governor Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump are locked in a legal battle as well as a verbal battle. Apart from National Guards, apparently 800 Marines were also deployed, which is relatively rare in US political history. So, and of course, the very day we had the parade, we also had the No Kings protests around America. So over to you, Glenn. What does this,
if I may, you touch upon
mean?
Not to be dismissive at all, but you have pointed out to us sort of the froth of what is happening, which we all see, because those are the shiny objects that are moving and so on, to mix my metaphors. But what's happening is historically significant and alarming in United States society and politics. I have said in virtually every interview I've done for the past 10 years, the United States is facing the greatest crisis to its culture society, I say, and institutions, meaning government, since 1861 at the least. And I would argue even worse as a threat because then in our Civil War 150 years ago, the nation, 175 years ago, the nation split in half, but its institutions were not challenged by those who were under its jurisdiction, nor its theoretical objectives and ideals. All of that is the case today. Why are the points that you mentioned significant? Calling out the National Guard the way it was done is a nearly revolutionary step, more in the guise of a top-down putsch than bottom-up, of course, because the federal government may only nationalize the National Guard. I can't quote you the law, but it may only do so in a grave national emergency. All observers said, from the mayor to the police to the governor in California, that in a city of X thousands of square miles, there were 4 blocks or something to that effect that were being affected by the demonstrations. There was no crisis, despite what Fox News said, that would justify centralizing the power of the military in the chief executive entirely. That's only been done once since, I think, the Civil War, or perhaps since World War I forget. And that was in 1967 during terrible riots over civil rights and racial tensions, the assassination of, it was just before the assassination of Martin Luther King. So that's one thing. The second is, what is the theoretical objective, the construct that is guiding the policies being implemented by the Trump administration? There are two things I'm sure I've spoken of them before. One is the theory of the unitary executive. Sounds abstruse. It's critically important for this. And the other is embodied in contemporary politics by this Project 2025. What is the objective of Project 2025? I've mentioned this before. A classmate of mine at Harvard named Grover Norquist has devoted his life. He's one of the fathers of the objective, which is that this will sound insane, I think, frankly, but it is not. It is sincerely pursued. The objective is that the federal government should only have 2 functions. One is border control, and 2 is national defense. Only 2 functions. Social services, welfare, equal opportunity programs, no other function. Research on medicines should be the purview or pursued by the federal government. So to achieve that, you should reduce the size and the budget of the federal government by 50%. Think of Doge and what it was theoretically trying to achieve. The second thing is this theory of unitary executive. This comes out of the neoconservatives. I've mentioned this before. It always sounds outlandish. It is literally the case. The theoretical father of the theory of the unitary executive is Carl Schmitt, who was Adolf Hitler's lawyer. And the belief is that the American system of government is inefficient, inappropriate for world power, and we have to change it so that the executive can actually wield power the way Xi Jinping does. I will build a highway here, and eminent domain is not even necessary because we simply seize stuff. We don't have to compensate, whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that may be coherent and it may be correct that the American government by design and practice is inefficient and not well suited to the role of a global power or even to manage itself. But that is literally also revolutionary in intent. So then there's the third component, which is not institutional, and that is cultural, which is that only Americans who look like me and Stephen Schleicher and Peter Isaacson, culturally, although this would be denied with, as the French say, at the end of one's lips, du bout des lèvres, really get to decide what the cultural norms and practices and then structures of the American society and government are. And that is the agenda, which is why Harvard figures into this. Harvard is the icon of the effete, intellectual, cosmopolitan, international, multicultural America, which is the antithesis of all of the things, the objectives and the definitions of what it is to be American that I just described. And so it's both a straw man and an icon, not both. It's a straw man and an icon and an easy target to show the base of the MAGA movement that we are standing up for real America, not these people who speak foreign languages and lift their pinkies when they sip tea. And so you can deride these
I
things
mean,
and make
and
jokes
there
about
is,
them, just as the critics, frankly, of Adolf Hitler did, saying, who would believe any of this stuff? Of course we can handle people who are so simple-minded, until they were all put into the gas chamber. And so I'm not saying there's going to be a gas chamber in America, but what is happening is a direct conscious attack to undermine and to shift the foundations of the American governmental structure and the nature of American society. And it is hugely consequential what is happening, even though the courts, time after time after time, will shoot down the specific objectives by changing the nature of the debates and the fights. The whole paradigm and bell curve of what's acceptable and not, and what is practice and what is America, is shifting.
so, I mean, yes, point taken. But let's look at some of the criticisms of the American state. We've both agreed that there has been a thickening of processes. Today, to start a small business, a restaurant, the number of permissions you need is insane. And in a way, regulation has become a barrier to entry for smaller businesses. We've also seen, and I'm not saying that Donald Trump is addressing this issue, we've also seen an extraordinary concentration of power in a few companies. The mergers and acquisitions that have happened over the last few decades are completely opposite to what Teddy Roosevelt achieved with his trust busting. He created a competitive economy by breaking up big oil and breaking or destroying the power of the big companies.
Well,
So
that's actually the apotheosis of the deregulated state. I'm sure Peter would agree with me on that. They're so the people they are. This movement is deriding what it has actually made possible. And your issue on the deregulation, this is a classic conservative Republican
no, but what I'm
complaint
saying is
about the American
you need
system.
some
But
balance. That's
that's
all I'm
not the
saying.
same thing as a
No, it's not the
revolution.
same thing. But what I'm saying is it is responding to strains and stresses in society. You have a mayoral candidate in New York who at the same time says he's Shia Islam, and at the same time it is LGBTQ plus one. And come on, if you're LGBTQ plus one or whatever in Iran, you're pretty much dead. Women can't even uncover their hair. And this extraordinary lack of coherence when it comes to the Democratic Party to respond to the massive challenges that the US is facing. And economically, there has been a hollowing out of the working class. There is a cost of living crisis. The cost of education is ridiculously high. Harvard does have a very chilling effect on free speech. You and I are not welcome there because we are both racist, we are classist. I mean, you're a WASP who worked in the CIA. I'm a Rajput. I'm a feudal lord. We are not welcome. So, I'm not defending the theory of unitary power. What I'm saying is that these movements emerge when there are great fault lines in society, great fault lines in political institutions, and great fault lines in the economy. When there are a lot of people who have lost a lot, they don't feel compensated. When the elites have become effete, the simple minded man who has a quick answer to a complex question is the savior. I mean, you
Well,
could
I think,
argue.
yeah, yeah, your description of the ills of the ruling elite, which the MAGA movement is opposing, are accurate. But I also think strongly that they are superficial to the fundamental issue, which is that no group which holds power has power. I think in history, whether it's a state or a faction within society, has willingly surrendered its power. And the people who look like me, the WASP, the white male elite, is no longer, I think, literally a majority in the country, and power has clearly shifted. And whatever the excesses there have been or are in these shifts, culturally, politically, institutionally, with regard to regulation and so on, the fundamental point is one of culture, race, and power. And the erstwhile haves, even if they were poor, struggling coal miners in West Virginia, they were still part of the dominant paradigm culturally and institutionally, are unwilling to have people whose name ends in a vowel or who don't have the same pigmentation as I become the power majority. That's
Yes.
fundamentally it.
Yes, there is an element of truth, and that will play out even worse in Europe, because in Europe there's a religious divide, and Europe went through religious wars from 1618 to 1648, the 30 Years' War. But I think that is again one, but not the only thing. Social media has exacerbated division. People live off misinformation and disinformation. Everyone ends up in echo chambers through filter bubbles. We are also seeing a destruction of critical thought, as Peter Isaacson points out repeatedly, and I agree with him. You don't have critical thinking from an early age. You said it, that we are going from the written word to, again, pictures. The Miracle in Morality, please. A massive drop in literacy, a massive drop in critical thinking. So all of that, and in the backdrop, we've seen a decline of institutions, including political parties and the press. In 1998, for every job in journalism, for every one job in journalism, there were, let's say, 1.9, say 2 jobs in public relations. Today, that number is 1 to 10. So all you're getting is spin, public relations. So how can you have a democracy? Just let me finish the point. How can you have a representative democracy when a citizenry is not informed and not educated?
Well, it's the apotheosis of de Tocqueville's analysis of American society, or rather of democracy, which is when all voices are equal, then no voice is an authority, and then a fool has as much wisdom as a sage, and you find yourself in chaos.
On that happy note,
and the tyranny of the majority.
And the tyranny of the majority. On that happy note, ladies and gentlemen, it's been lovely to have you here. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you sign up for the FO exclusive. We do this live every month. We take questions. We try our best to make sense of the world. And it's bye for now from me and Glenn.
Goodbye.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.